Welcome to the Festival of Bharat. This is season 4 of the Festival of Bharat, and I am your host Kamal Madishan. We are a platform that believes in having open and frank conversations about Bharat with no holds barred. And today we are going to discuss topics which have a bearing not only on today but also on tomorrow. We are going to discuss education, leadership, and many other issues of importance for our civilization. And to do this, we have a very special guest with us who is the Dean of the Rashtram School of Public Leadership, Shobhit Mathur. Shobhit ji has been educated at some of the most prestigious universities. He pursued his BTech from IIT Bombay, then did an MS from University of Washington. He had a career in the United States before coming to India to pursue his passion for nation building. He has pursued his MBA from the Indian School of Business, Hyderabad, and has set up several organizations. He has worked with diaspora organizations in the US and even Suriname before coming to India, where he set up the Vision India Foundation, which is a modern nation building movement. 5 years after its setup, today it has transformed into Rashtram School of Public Leadership. And we have with him today to discuss several topics of leadership and issues of civilizational importance. Namaste, Shobhit ji, and welcome to the Festival of Bharat.
Namaste, Kamal, and namaste to all your viewers.
Thank you so much, Shobhit ji, for joining us at the Festival of Bharat. It is truly a pleasure to have you here. Shobhit ji, I want to first of all ask you about, what are some of the projects that you have been up to? How have you been? And can you tell us a little bit about Rashtram for the benefit of our viewers?
Yeah, thank you, Kamal. I think that's a very good question. And you have mentioned about my background. I would want to run over that for your viewers to understand why Rashtram, first of all, why we ended up where we are. So when I came back from the United States, I first set up an organization called Youth for Seva. The intent was to engage young people into volunteering work. The image I had at that time of the country was the primary problem, the hypothesis that I felt is that young people are disconnected from society. If we could find ways to engage them in solving society's problems, that would be a huge, way to bring about change, because I felt time and talent could bring a lot of change. That was what Youth for Seva was. And while I did that for about 5 years, what I realized is that, yes, a lot of young people could devote their time in solving community problems. But the problems of scale and sustainability are always there in the not-profit sector. What do I mean by this? Right? You could go about volunteering. You can go teaching in a government school in your neighborhood where you find that the teaching is not good or the teacher is missing. But then what do you do about the lakhs of schools across the country that are facing the same problem? Similarly, if you take up any other issue about healthcare, environment, people with disability, or many such things, ultimately a lot of problems in our country are systemic, are at the policy level. And while the social sector or the civil society is trying to address these problems at the grassroots, they also need systemic changes to happen. And that's when I realized that scale and sustainability in change comes also top down. While the bottom up is important, it's also a top down change that's needed. That's what motivated me to start the Vision India Foundation. And you have been a part of it and you understand very well what we try to do there. The intent was to engage young people in public policy and governance issues. So where we train young people on issues of national importance, policy issues, and then engage them with policymakers, engage them with governments, and leverage their talent to bring about this change. And while we did that again for about 5 years, what we realized is that yes, you could of course give talent to the government sector, and that will bring in a lot of fresh energy, and probably the system becomes more efficient in what it's doing. But fundamentally, over a period of time, what we realized is that yes, you could make the system more efficient and you could do some new innovative things. But again, the systems and institutions of our country are not designed to serve our people. They still have a colonial past. They're based on a lot of Western frameworks. So if you have a wrong machine trying to solve the problem, you can make it as efficient as you want, but it's still not going to serve the purpose. So we need a fundamental change. We need a systemic transformation for the various institutions, the various way we design policies, the way we perceive society, that is still very, very colonized. And that's why it's not serving our people. So we need to change that. And that's why we transformed into the Rashtram School of Public Leadership, because this needs tremendous amount of academic work. You need to do a lot of fundamental research. You need to understand what's plaguing our systems and where do we bring these changes. Not a lot of fundamental work has happened in this space. So that's where Vision India Foundation transformed into the Rashtram School of Public Leadership. I want to emphasize public leadership also because it's not what you typically hear as public policy, public administration, right? Those are subject matters. Those are things of skill which you can pick up. But then when you say public leadership, we want to bring the focus on the individual, right? And that is where the Indian education is actually truly has been a genius in designing how do we create individuals of that character, how do we bring out the excellence from within individuals, right? That has been the focus of the Indian education for several millennia, and that's what we want to bring up at Rashtram as well. So it's like a modern Gurukul set up in a campus close to Delhi, where we are focusing on creating the future public leaders for Bharat who would influence the entire world and try to address the global grand challenges that we face from a very Indian thought model. That's what Rashtram is intending to do.
Thank you so much, Shobhitji. And like you mentioned, as an alumnus of VIF, I think I've had the privilege to closely watch the journey, and it's truly my pleasure today to talk to you about it on this platform. Thank you for sharing that, Shobhitji. Shobhitji, you have been working in education, in the space of education and training, and in the fields of public policy and leadership for a very long time. And you've always said that finding the right leaders and problem solvers in our country should not be left for chance. So I want to ask you, what, according to you, are the main challenges for us as a society in nurturing good leaders?
Thanks, Kamal. A very interesting question because not too many people focus at leadership. The way our country actually or society thinks is that there would always be someone who would arise and would come out and help us out in every domain, right? And you don't see a focus a lot on leadership. And you are right, because if you look at it post independence, at least, you would have a very few handful of names that you could say were genuinely leaders who transformed the nation, who gave a new direction, who brought about wide scale change. Um, where are we grooming such people? We have always left it to chance. We have always hoped that someone would arrive and change things. That being said, it's also, as you have rightly identified, that it is also a systemic problem. There's something that is hindering such leaders from emerging. What are those? At least if you look at the recent times, you will see that there is a growing radical liberal idea that individuals are fundamental units of a society, right? Individuals who are working in their self-interest, who are rational, who are all equal, right? This is the dominant narrative that you hear today. Everyone is talking about themselves and their rights. Everybody wants to project themselves as victims, and they're all fighting for their rights rather than what you would call the Indian tradition or the Indian way to look at individuals is to elevate yourself, right? As we call it, abhyuday. How do you identify and fulfill your highest potential, right? So there is a race to the bottom in many ways. First of all, fragmenting society into atomic individuals, individuals who are victims, individuals who are constantly fighting for their rights. Now, nurturing leaders in this context is a big hindrance, right? Because there is always a race to the bottom. Everyone is looking about how do you get more from the state or from other institutions, right? Now, the way to actually nurture leadership is exactly the opposite, right? How do you elevate yourself? How do you think beyond yourself? How do you think of community? How do you think of society? How do you think of the nation, right? How do you put future generations ahead of yourself? Now, that is a completely opposite to the way the mainstream is currently, right? So this needs a different understanding of the human potential and how do we elevate it, and what is the role of all of us in our society. So that is one reason I feel, given the atomization of, as you call, society into individuals. That is creating a lot of issues in nurturing leaders who are selfless and working beyond themselves. Secondly, right from, I mean, if you look at the recent times in education, also, especially higher education, everyone is looking for some shortcuts to success. The whole Indian idea is more about investing on yourself, investing on some sadhana that can break your shackles, that can identify where you belong, why you belong, what are the issues that you would want to work on, what is your inherent strengths, what is your prakriti. There is no focus on going within and sharpening your inner skills, right? Or identifying and more about yourself and finding a connect with the world. So this again, this attitude of developing some external skills and finding a way, a shortcut to success, as opposed to investing on yourself in the long run and doing a sadhana, is lost. And if you look at the world and if you look at all the global leaders in any domain, right from science tech to all the way to politics or sports, anywhere in the world, unless people have done that investment on themselves, they have not excelled. That I think that spirit is being lost, that attitude is being lost, and you don't create leaders through any shortcut success, right? You'll have to work on yourself very hard. That is the second reason I identify. Finally, if you see as a society itself, there is a lack of a higher purpose, right? They say that we are a generation without any purpose. Right? During the colonial times, you can say still we had an external visible enemy, right? You could have seen as the British, who were our colonizers, and there was an obvious enemy. But now with that enemy gone, we are kind of directionless in our purpose. We need to, I mean, there's no visible enemy, but the enemy is in many ways within. It is about us as a society identifying what's our true potential, what's our true purpose of existing on this planet, what do we have to contribute to the world. This is not being thought. So when you don't have a direction as a society itself, you get disillusioned, and then where do the leaders rise from, right? The leaders are there who can give a vision to society, who can show what our potential is and lead society towards that. So I think in many different ways, we are facing external headwinds in grooming the leaders in the Indian context as you would want them. And of course, we have to identify this and break through all of them.
Absolutely, Shobhitji, and that actually makes me want to go a little bit deeper into what you said. And if you look at the contemporary, the current educational landscape, there are many new trends coming up, and one of them is the whole idea of liberal arts education. It has gained a lot of popularity, but it hasn't really produced the kind of knowledge or people that are in sync with the ethos of Bharat. What you've mentioned. Why does this happen? And is there an inherent problem in this liberal arts education in India?
Yeah. Thanks, Kamal. I think that's a very interesting insight, because if you see liberal arts education, actually it is supposed to liberate you. It is supposed to give you understanding of society, understanding the problems, finding a multidisciplinary way to approach the problem and solve it. Right? But unfortunately, they're always in the controversy, all liberal arts colleges. Why is this? That's a very interesting question, because I think the crux of the problem definitely is that the Western liberal arts education is based a lot on Western theories, a lot of theories that have emanated from Europe primarily and scholars in the Europe. Nothing wrong with that, but just doesn't work for the Indian context, right? So sociology, anthropology, take up any other subjects of philosophy, philology. These are all having psychology, right, to understand the human beings. These are all the dominant theories are still Western. And if you try to look at the Indian issues from that lens, it's not going to work. For example, if I talk to any liberal arts college student, just an average student, if I look at them, right? So, what are you taught? Whatever you are taught is a big disconnect from the reality in many ways. You are taught to hate yourself because you are born with so many different privileges, and those privileges have been used to oppress the other people in society. You look around and say, okay, that's probably not true, but okay, I'll absorb this. You're taught to hate your heritage, your ancestors, your past, your texts, everything in the text is supposedly wrong, your rituals. your caste, right? It is seen as something that has always been in conflict with others, your gender. So everything is a conflict, everything is a war, and you are at the center of it. So when you give this type of a oppressor versus an oppressed, and there are multiple wars happening in society all the time, you come up with a lot of disgust and self-hate, right? So a person who is groomed in such a way of understanding society and its issues, and is always looking for binaries and looking for the wars that are happening, to assimilate it and create solutions and lead society is not going to happen. But at the same time, the reality is very, very different. There is a lot of harmony, diversity in society, and India as a civilization has lasted for thousands of years, and it has flourished and it has reached its highest glories. And you try to map these theories that you have learned in the classroom to the ground reality, you can't make sense. And then you say something is wrong, there is majoritarianism, something else has overtaken the country. And this way to perceive and understand doesn't give you the right set of tools or skills to even make sense of what's happening. And this results in more and more frustration, self-hate, hating your communities and the civilization. You want to throw it off lock, stock, and barrel, bring about a revolution to cleanse all this and ape the modern Western democracies and bring them to India, right? So this whole sense of everything is bad, everything is at odds with everyone else, and we'll have to cleanse this through revolution and bring about a change is not going to happen. It doesn't work that way. You have just been taught the wrong things. While that being said, we need to look at if you liberal arts education itself is amazing. It should happen, but it should happen from an Indian context. And that's where I think we also have an issue, because we don't have a lot of scholarship based on our indigenous knowledge sources. Right? If we would develop our own liberal arts curriculum, and that's what we're trying at Rashtram, that would give you the right lens to look at our society. So if you take psychology and if you look at the Vedic sciences of psychology, right, there's a huge tomes of literature in the yogic sciences that will help you understand oneself better. If you look at sociology from the Indian perspective, if you look at public policy and issues from the Indian perspective, because this is a living civilization, you will find a lot of resonance with what you study in the classroom and when you go and study society. Right? And that I think is what is needed. That will give you a much better way to understand society, understand the issues, build solutions, and work on those solutions more from an Indian perspective, rather than picking up something which is very Eurocentric and is based definitely on very different knowledge systems.
Absolutely, Shobhitji. Thank you for sharing those insights. I think it's so important that our education is rooted in our civilization, and I think you very beautifully explained that to us. Shobhitji, that makes me wonder about one very recent development. We've seen the news of a change in a particular syllabus in I think the undergraduate history syllabus. So I just wanted to ask you about your thoughts on that, as well as the larger question of what else has to be done in that direction.
Yeah, thanks, Kamal. Yeah, I also just came across that change about the BA history curriculum. Yeah, I think it's very, very important. It's about time that this curriculum is changed. I think some of us are definitely aware of this, that the left, so-called left, has taken over the academic institutions, particularly in the 60s and the 70s, right? And they are the dominant faculty in various education institutions, right? So, and they have designed and they have got into a lot of academic institutions. They have designed the academic curriculum that we still read, right? And as and when new scholarship is arising, a lot of this fraud or a lot of this false scholarship is getting uncovered. If you see the recent example of the Ram Janmabhoomi movement and the court case that went all the way up to the Supreme Court, it took a few decades. The tomes and tomes of literature that the party representing Ram Lala was presenting was in total contradiction to what was the original thought, right? What Bibi Lal, K.K. Mohammed, right, Meenakshi Jain, Koinad Elst, right, and many other different scholars presented turned out to be finally true. while the dominant theories were still by Romila Thapar, Irfan Habib, and all of them. And it was, the evidence was gathered and was presented, was argued, supported, right? And then people were like, wow, we didn't know all this, right? That this is the history of our country. And I think more and more that scholarship is arising. And it is yet, I think it's a small step, but it's a very important step that you can call that the history curriculum in the country is starting to get decolonized. And then a lot of false history that has been taught right through our schooling and in higher education is now starting to change. But again, I would want to re-emphasize that it is a very small change. A lot needs to be done, and this is not going to happen overnight. We need to produce those scholars, right? We need those tens and hundreds of scholars, historians, as we previously discussed, who are grounded in the Indic knowledge systems, who understand India from the Indian lens, who are decolonized, and then write the true history of Bharat. And eventually, of course, we would want to see a day when the next education policy of the country is made, right? It is grounded in the Indic knowledge systems. Indic knowledge systems is not an add-on, right? It is the core component, and a lot of this history textbooks have to be revised. Again, this is one more of those things, right? What you read in the textbooks and what you see in the ground reality is completely different. History is very obvious, and if you are written a very Delhi-centric curriculum, and when you go out and you are unable to relate to what was written, that okay, you say Akbar was a very benign king, and then you go and look at Rajasthan and the different issues that have happened there, and you say, "This I was never taught this. I was never taught this." This is all what young people are saying when they are getting exposed to more and more of the ground reality. So a lot has to be done, and it cannot be done merely through activism and rhetoric. It is a need of academic scholarship. You need to study history. You need to produce those historians of repute, and you need to produce them from our thought models. That's going to take a lot of time, but I think it's a very good start, and I would want to congratulate the government for taking this step. And hopefully, this is a small step that can help us bring about many more changes as well.
Absolutely, Shobhitji. And I think, like you said, there is a need for sustainable long-term efforts on the part of all of us to really decolonize our education and truly root it in Bharatiya ethos. Uh, Thank you for sharing that. Shobhitji, I want to sort of shift subjects a little bit, and I want to ask you about one of the most puzzling questions when it comes to leadership, and that is whether leaders are born or are they made? So can you please share your perspective on this?
Yeah, very interesting question, Kamal, and that's the question that I get very often asked at Rashtram, that you are building a school of public leadership, but leadership is innate. Leadership cannot be taught in a classroom. So I would want to first give a exposure to the audience about what are the different philosophies of education, right? There is one philosophy that says we are all born as clean slates. It's called tabula rasa, right? You're all clean slates, and the knowledge particularly comes from experience and perception. The other theory says is that it's all innate, it's innatism, right? And that states we are born with innate knowledge, and experiences only help us unlock what is within us, right? Education is one of those things where almost every Indian philosopher, right? We take contemporary times to in the past, right? Ancient past, everybody has given a lot of focus to education, and that's because we always want the next generation to be better than this generation, right? And that can only happen through education. I'll give you a very interesting example from the Mahabharata that we use at Rashtram as well to design the curriculum at Rashtram, and it's a very core philosophy of education that is very well encapsulated. So, what does it say? There is a shloka in the Udyoga Parva, right, and it gives a very good example of what education is. It says, "Acharya Padam Adate, Padam Shishya Swamedhaya, Kalen Padam Adate, Padam Swa Brahmacharini." So what does it say? It says 1/4 of your knowledge comes from your teacher, 1/4 comes from your own intelligence, 1/4 comes from your peers, and 1/4 will only come with time. Right? So teachers, self-intelligence, peer learning, and finally experience or time will only tell you how we'll give you the rest of the 1/4 of the education, right? So this is very, very important, that you create an education system that is based on this. So what does it mean? Of course, one is it is acharya as well, right? Acharyas are not just teachers. Acharyas are someone whom you emulate. So you have to bring in role models and make them accessible to the students, right? That is there. Then the 1/4 is your innate intelligence, right? So you have to identify this and hone it. Then it's also from peer learning. So how much of our classroom is dependent on learning from our colleagues? And then of course it is from you give them the right experience with time. So you'll have to also bring in a lot of field component where they go experience society, and learn through that, right? So this is where I think we have to design the education curriculum holistically. And Swami Vivekananda has said this: education is the manifestation of perfection already in man. So the whole education system from the Indian thought process is very inside out. You'll have to build on the innate knowledge you have. You have to bring in the field experience. You have to bring in accessible role models from whom you will learn, right? And even if you look at, for example, Chanakya and Chandragupta, right, the famous Guru Shishya, who, and if you talk about public leaders, Chandragupta would come first to our mind, right? Even though he identified Chandragupta to make him into a Raja, right, that needed external. So it's a combination of both, and that is how the Indian education system has always been. And it is not just about what we have thought at Rashtram, because when we are trying to do this, we looked at what is the global equivalence. Is there somebody else who has attempted to create public leaders in institutions? And then we found two close equivalents. One was an institute called the Matsushita Institute of Government and Management in Japan, right? So this was set up by the founder of Panasonic, when in 1979 he realized that if Japan has to lead the world, we'll have to constantly produce great leaders, and there is no institution that is doing this. So he set this up, the Matsushita Institute in Japan, and they have been running for about 40 years now and have been very successful, in including one prime minister, several mayors, several members of parliament have been produced that. But very importantly, again, the education there is based on the Japanese ethos. So they understood what the Japanese knowledge systems are and how do you create individuals who can lead based on those value systems. So I think the foresight of Matsushita was amazing. Similarly, there is an institute in France. I think it's called Champ Po. It was set up in 1870 because that's when France lost to Prussia. And then when the French army was beaten, they realized what's wrong, right? If we don't create, the more well-grounded education for our leadership, we're going to continue to lose. And through this crisis, they built up this institution, and primarily it was based for training the aristocracy. Now it has gone and it's training many more people. But again, they also realized that we have to create the future public leaders, and that's how we could save our nation. And we can, of course, and both of them went back to their knowledge systems, understood what education in their knowledge systems means, and trained the young students of their institutes like that. And they have been fairly successful models. So when we look to the global equivalents at Rashtram, that's what we identify as, and then that's what we are trying to do here as well, right? Trying to delve into our knowledge systems, understand what education is, how to groom leadership from our context, and trying to bring that to the classroom.
Absolutely, Shobhitji. Very fascinating insights you shared with us. Shobhitji, if we could again go back to our discussion about Indic knowledge systems. Now, there is, like we have discussed, the very important and urgent need for leaders to be grounded in Indic knowledge systems in Bharat, and the various different schools of thoughts that we have. Can you, talk to us a little bit about this? Why is this important? And more importantly, I think, what kind of a difference also it can make in our societies?
Okay, thanks, Kamal. I'll try to elaborate on this. So we have all at least heard this Yatha Raja Tatha Praja, right? So irrespective of, I can see you nodding. So irrespective of where from the country you are, as is the ruler, so are the people, right? So it's not the other way around that we have said. That is the importance that we have placed. Yatha Raja Tatha Praja, right? So that is the onus we have placed on the state machinery and the individuals who are serving the state, right? And the people emulate the ruler. So it's very, very important to create that so-called righteous ruler, right? And this is a very foundation of the Dharmic state. So that is the importance we have placed on the highest person and how we should create the person. So a lot of work actually has to happen on creating the right leadership, right? So the Raja in the Indian context, of course, king is not the good equivalent, is seen as protector of the people, their liberties, and most importantly, it is to create an abhyudaya. So people should reach their highest potential, and the Raja is the palaka or the protector of people and their liberties in making this happen. So while you protect the external state and you try to reduce, bring order and reduce external aggression, you want to give freedom to the people and help give them the liberties to make them fulfill their highest potential, right? And so, what are the primary responsibilities of, if you can see the Raja, right? One is the soft elements of the civilization, right? Now, these are related to aesthetics and spirituality, the scholars, the seers, the artists, the women, the children. It is the responsibility of the Raja to protect all this, right? And there is a very interesting conversation that happens between Narad and Yudhishthira, right? And all this, that is what Yudhishthira says, that these are the one is the primary responsibility is to protect the softer elements, the dharmic elements of society. Then, of course, as I said, internal law and order, reducing the external aggression. But what has happened over a period of time, at least post-independence, when we have picked up a lot of our models of polity from the West, particularly from the British that were ruling. So this has actually all flipped, right? Now, if you see elections and we are in election time, what is being fought, you will see that elections are now being fought for the lowest denominator in many ways, right? So people are asking for more and more welfare. People are there's a lot of appeasement, one at the expense of other. So there is a sense of nobody is aspiring for the highest, right? And when you do this, right, it is actually entirely flipped, and you don't create the right set of leaders who emerge, because the leaders are seen as people who dole out welfare, and the society is aspiring to go lower and lower in their demands, right? So I think this is very important because we need to understand what is the role of a Raja, what is the role of a leader, how a dharmic polity should be designed that would result in the collective upliftment of society. While the model of polity that we have chosen has completely flipped, and you have created incentives for going lower and lower in your aspirations, and you have created incentives for choosing the set of people who would deliver all this to you. So a society that was always aspiring to be leading the world in providing wisdom and knowledge is now looking very inward and always sinking in that sense, right? So I think it is a way we have chosen our political structure, our polity, our institutions, the so-called democracy, that the model that we have chosen is resulting in this, and it's about time we understand how the state has to be actually structured and changed so that this change can happen.
Absolutely, Shobhitji. And I think one of the things I've heard you say previously is about, you mentioned the Chanakya's Mooladhara, which also places the importance of dharma. And I mean, for dharma to be established, it's so important ultimately for the Raja as well, that there is a concept of Indra Vijay. And I think that is really something that our civilization teaches us. Could you share a little bit about that as well?
Oh yeah. So that thanks Kamal for reminding me that. So and he says this, right, that Rajyasya Moolam Indriya Jaya, right? So Indriya Jaya is the person who has conquered his senses, and that is the mool of the state. So that's so significant, right? That nations are built by leaders who master their senses, and we have actually chosen this as the tagline at Rashtram as well. a very, very different perspective of leadership. Typically, leadership is seen as very external, right? You are good in public speaking, you are good in networking, you have a few skills, to negotiate, and all these different things are given, right? But nobody talks about Indriya Jaya. And imagine a text written a couple of millennia ago that still highlights that. And to this day, we realize this, that the typical pitfall of people at the highest positions are ones who have not conquered their senses. Um, I mean, that is, I think, thanks for highlighting it. That is the big contribution that the Indic knowledge systems can bring. And when was Arthashastra discovered? Arthashastra was just discovered about 100 years back. Imagine, right, if that person had not found it, and imagine the lot of tomes and tomes of literature that is out there that has been untapped, and what could be the knowledge that would come out of it. And one sutra from the Chanakya Niti can give you an answer to the lot of leadership issues that the globe is facing. Imagine what we have, imagine the Vidura Niti, imagine the different Shanti Parva of the Mahabharat. There have been so many leadership lessons given right from the times of the Ramayana as well. And if we could bring this out as a leadership curriculum, imagine the set of people we would be creating that would be grounded in our thought and would be leading and bringing about change to a lot of global issues. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely, Shobhit. And I think a lot of challenges and issues in leadership that we face, we see across the world. I think can be addressed when we look at frameworks like these and ideas like these. Shobhit, and that brings me to another question I had, which is beyond also some of the topics that we've discussed. Our knowledge systems actually have a lot of wisdom that we can tap into, like we said, and apply it to several other fields. In the fields of governance, leadership, we have discussed extensively. So, can you share a few more examples of this? Because I've seen you talk about the Shanti Parv of the Mahabharata. If you could also tell us about the governance lessons that our civilizational heritage gives us.
Yeah, thanks, Kamal. I think the Shanti Parva of Mahabharata definitely has a lot. That was, as we all know, told by Bhishma to Yudhishthira in the presence of Sri Krishna himself, and the different, his whole experience of several decades was shared with Yudhishthira, who eventually was the Pandava king who led the kingdom. But Kamal, I would want to bring out something which is unique and which has probably not been studied as much, and it is from the Ramayana, and it is particularly from the Ayodhya Kanda. Now, this is very interesting. If you know the scene where Sri Ram has taken off for Vanvas, and Bharat comes home and he realizes that he's not there, and he goes and requests Sri Ram to come back and rule the kingdom of Ayodhya. And then there's a conversation that happens towards the end of Ayodhya Kanda, which is very, very important, because that is where Sri Rama gives leadership lessons to Bharata and says, "You go back and rule on my behalf." Now imagine getting a leadership lesson, a public leadership lesson from Sri Ram himself, right? And he is the epitome. To this day, he's seen as the model person to all of us emulate, right? So what could be the leadership lessons that Sri Ram gave Bharata, and Bharata actually implemented it for 14 years on his behalf and led the kingdom and kept it on till he came back from his Vanvas, right? So it's a very interesting, and I would encourage all your viewers to actually go in and look at the last part of Ayodhya Kanda from the Valmiki Ramayana, and you will find this. So, and this is also the beauty of our epics, right? It is not a typical story, right? A lot of it has lessons that could be applied not just in your personal life. A lot of us apply the values given by Sri Ram in our personal life, but also in political life. In various fields of public life, you will find that our epics have a way of giving us this knowledge which can be applied, right? So he gives two different ways. First, he talks about what are the typical failings of a king, right? What could actually go wrong? What are the don'ts? What you should already know, right? Very interesting. I'll list down some of them. One is Nastikam. So that is atheism, right? That is right. Then inattention, krodh, pramadam, right? Procrastination, evading the wise, right? And we talked about senses. So something that you helps you in indulging in senses, you should avoid that, right? Being alone in planning the affairs of the kingdom, right? Today we talk about teamwork, we talk about stakeholder consultation. So you should not take decisions which are on your own, right? You should involve the wise counsel. You should keep your important decisions should be kept secret. So it talks about different things, about 14 different things which typically are the failings of a king. And that is very interesting because in one small sutra, he gives you 14 different ways that a king, downfall of a king could happen. And this is very important for you to apply it in your in leadership lessons. Because if you know what things have gone wrong previously and you can learn it from the master himself, you could apply it in your context, right? Then he talks about what are the knowledge and skills that are needed in a king, right? So the next thing is what are the do's. And very interestingly, the first thing again he says is Indriya Jaya. So he says subjugation of the senses and hone your senses to go beyond what is the immediate gratification that they receive. Then he talks about the three Vedas, the three branches of learning. It says the Vedas, agriculture, commerce, other vocational skills. Then about Dharma, Artha, and Kama, right? The Purusharthas. Um, then the different, what are the different limbs of a state, right? What are the different, as we call the organs of the state today? What are different subjects? So it's very interesting. He talks about 8 subjects that every public leader should know. Now this is agriculture, trade, defense, building bridges, you can call infrastructure, right? Then ecology, mining, taxation, and building emergency shelters, right? So in terms of war. So in different ways, they talk about fortifications, it talks about different strategic ways of negotiating, whom to negotiate with, whom not to negotiate with, what the knowledge systems that you have to be known about, right? And again, it also talks about the same thing which you read in the Chanakya Niti about Samadana, Danda, and Veda, right? So what we realize is that right from the times of Ramayana, right, all the way up to the Arthashastra that we have the latest document, Arthashastra was building on all this. So when we say Indriya Jaya or when we say the 4 expedients of negotiating, right, or the different branches of learning, the ways of fortification, what not to do, whose company to keep, all this was taught by Sri Ram to Bharata at the end of Ayodhya Kanda, and this is the basis of his learning. And you can imagine that this knowledge system was living and was transferred through a Guru Shishya Parampara to this day, right? That has been the unique feature of our education system, right? And if you see, these are not merely external skills, right? These are all very, very internal skills that you have to develop. And at Rashtram, what we're trying to do is we're trying to call this the meta skills, skills that will help you develop more and more skills as the context or the time changes. This is very important, and that is a very unique aspect of our education system. And public leadership has been a part of our education since millennia. That is brought about. If we could build our curriculum based on that, and as you rightly said, Shanti Parva definitely has a lot of that. There is a lot in Mahabharata. Mahabharata itself, in a single document, a single epic, could give you so many lessons of understanding different contexts, right from not just public leadership of governing a state, but we know about international relations. I know you yourself have designed a lot of case studies and negotiation workshops based on what you see in our epics. So I think that is the knowledge system, that is our heritage, and somehow we have kept that aside and have picked up something else that doesn't relate and work for us.
It is so fascinating, Shobhitji, and I think it's a wonder that after many millennia, I think the relevance of all of it is so profound, and it sort of makes me wonder how much there is, how much wealth there is to explore, and I'm sure our viewers are going to go back and read about all of these different wisdom that our civilization can offer us. Shobhitji, when we have discussions like these, we often also hear about Rashtra and Rajya. Can you please explain what the difference between these two is?
Oh, thanks, Kamal. Thanks for actually catching that, because it's always used interchangeably. There's always a confusion. Then, of course, the concept of Hindu Rashtra comes in, right? And we have chosen Rashtra as the name of the institution that we are running, so it's called Rashtram. So yes, that is true that Rajya and Rashtra are used interchangeably. There's often a confusion, and but there is the distinction is fairly obvious and it is clear. So Rajya, I think the closest equivalent you could call is the state, and Rashtra is the nation. So Rajya is very political, while Rashtra is geocultural, right? So this is the broad change. I mean, the difference between the two. Um, what we have to understand is the Rajya is a kind of a super layer based on the Rashtra. Rashtra is the living civilization, the nation. It is geocultural. It is eternal. Rajya will keep changing. It's a political entity, right? But what is more important for us to understand is the Rajya has to be in consonance with the Rashtra, right? And that is where I think the problem today arises from. If we understand this distinction, right? So what we will realize is the Rashtra and the Rajya today are in conflict. The Rashtra in our civilization was always designed, as I said earlier, for the highest upliftment of the individuals, for the abhyudaya of society. All the systems, institutions were all designed in such a way, the practices, the rituals, the knowledge system is all based on elevating yourself. And the Rajya today, we have adopted something external and have imposed it on the Rashtra. So in many ways, the Rajya is suffocating the Rashtra, right? So that is where you find this constant conflict today, right? Take up any issue, right? You take up and you bring a concept like secularism and impose it on a Dharmic society like Bharat, right? And it's not going to work. There's always going to be a conflict, right? So what is secular? What is not secular, right? Should I do a Bhumi Pujan of the new parliament building or should I not do it? Is it so? We have brought in minority, the concept of minorities. We have brought in so many different things, and we have tried to impose it on this nation that this is not relevant, right? So we have always understood our nation as this geocultural unity right from the Himalayas all the way up to the oceans at the bottom, and then the different institutions. There are religious institutions. There is, of course, a Varnashrama. There's a way of life that has been designed, right? And all of them is working towards bringing the highest goal of the individual to be fulfilled and its highest pursuits. And the Rashtra has, and we have chosen an entire constitution model, the model of the polity, and imposed it on this. That doesn't resonate with this. And that's the work at Rashtram as well. That how do we bring a consonance between these two, right? How do we build a polity that understands the aspirations of the nation and is aligned? And we have not done much work on that. And I think you understand, right? Right from the times of the way the constitution was drafted, all the way till where we are today. I mean, I'm saying the constitution because when you talk about the polity or the state, the original text is the constitution, right? And that defines all these things. So, and you will find more and more of these conflicts coming out. It's not just Sabrimala, it's not just Ram Janmabhoomi, it is not just the places of worship act, it is not just about secularism. Lot of these questions, if you boil down and see, you will see that what the nation is aspiring, what the nation is shouting out, the state doesn't have the way to understand that. There is no way to assimilate those aspirations. And then if you come from a different thought process, you will say this is majoritarianism, this is something else. So there is a lot of cognitive dissonance that is happening. That is why the old lady worshipping her small temple in a small village in our country, when she does her worship, she still is not doing it for herself. If you notice this, right? So towards the end, she will say, "Loka Sukhino Bhavantu," right? So she talks about the well-being of the entire cosmos, and we have somehow dismissed her, and we have imposed something else and on her, right? And then she's confused what's happening, right? So I think it's very important that our polity is understands what our living civilization is and is based and built on that. That needs first of all a lot of self-confidence, a lot of decolonizing our own mind, understanding, decolonizing our liberal arts curriculum, so that we could build something like this. Yeah.
Absolutely, Shobhitji. You mentioned about the need for having a polity which is, grounded in dharmic values. Do you think it's also important, and you've also spoken about individuals, and by as individuals, we have to be rooted in our civilizational worldview, but also the polity has to do that. Do you think Bharat, to take its rightful place in the world, it's also very important that this is done?
Yeah, Kamal, I think that is the crux and that is the most important project of our generation, at least, that we should start this process. I just want to go back to the origin of this, and I mentioned this a bit previously, but it's very important that I elaborate. Right. So when we achieved our independence in 1947, we had an opportunity to design a Rajya that aligns with the Rashtra, but I don't think we had the time. We were very nervous that would we stay together, what would happen. So we just picked up whatever we had, right? We adopted a colonial state. We didn't criticize it much. Even if you look at the Constituent Assembly debates, you will not find these questions coming up there, right? So we adopted the concept of a nation state, the union of states, equality of choice, democracy, secularism. These are all taken lock, stock, and barrel from the 1935 Government of India Act, and then brought in, and then we adopted something else from other constitutions. We like took up the parliamentary form of the government. We took up a cabinet system. We took up fundamental rights. We never as much spoke about duties, while this entire civilization has only spoken about dharma and duties. But we took up that. We took up the judiciary from somewhere else, right? And this was all brought in here, and there is not much debate that has happened. While if you look at our knowledge tradition, you would find the Dharma Shastras, right? And there has been some commentary on that. But in the entire Constituent Assembly debates, nobody argued on the cause of the Dharma Shastras. You will not find this word even being mentioned there. This is all done in a haste. Probably at that time, we cannot judge them from today's context. Maybe that was what was the need, and maybe we didn't have the scholarship at that time. It is about time. Now, if you think about it today, right now we are a stable, growing economy, we have the prosperity and the stability. So can we start thinking that if we would want a polity, right? A lot of African nations also did this during the 90s, right? If we have to redo and we have to do this, how do we do it differently for us that works today? Right? I think that is the need. And this otherwise we'll always, as I said, we are in this confusion of these two minds. And some of the scholars have mentioned is that now it is so internalized that we don't even see it, that it is there. And we are trying to find answers in the existing system, and it's not happening. So we'll have to break through and do this. So what would we look at from a dharmic polity lens? I'll give you an example of an institution that is not spoken about as much, but is where we find the difference to be very obvious. And me being in Haryana, I can see this even more starkly. That is the judiciary or the judicial system. Of course, we have a particular way that we have adopted the system. But does that mean we didn't have a judicial system prior to 1947? Right? We always had if a society or a civilization has to flourish, of course, conflicts were resolved in many different ways. Today, you have what about 3.5 crore cases are pending. They take their own time. Even if you and I get into a conflict on the street, we don't want to go to the courts. So the very strong institution of the judiciary that is supposed to give me justice, educated elite are feeling afraid of approaching them. So we have an institution that is so alien that we don't understand what they're speaking. We don't know how to approach them. There is no sense of justice because the time taken is too long. The way it is conveyed is very alien to my cultural values. So why does it, even if you go, I walked into the villages of Haryana and talked to people, still to this day, justice is delivered within the community, right? It is the elders, it is the panchayat, it is different institutions that are lasted for several centuries that are providing accessible justice, not just at low cost, timely, culturally integrated with society. So there is so much happening, and we have ignored all these institutions and have taken up something else, and that has not worked for us. In fact, it is at the verge of a collapse. So if we don't delve into understanding our society and its native institutions and bring them and give them legitimacy, bring them to the mainstream, and build our polity based on that. What is happening to the judicial system today is going to happen to every other institution. So people don't resonate with what happens in the parliamentary form of democracy. Why do you have this bicameral thing, and what is all these different things? So that doesn't mean we throw it away lock, stock, and barrel. That is not how our society has always been. Has been evolutionary. It believes in small incremental changes. But what is the direction that we need to go? That I think needs to happen. Otherwise, this big divide is only going to increase further and further, because as society becomes more confident and self-assertive, and they realize that these institutions are not working for us, there would be growing anger. So it's about time we really go back. And I think the crux of it again is the constitution. Now, how does it happen without the basic structure of the constitution being changed? I don't know. But if we start the conversation, I'm pretty sure we'll find ways to go about solving this.
Absolutely, Shobhitji. Thank you so much. I think we have covered many aspects from institutions like the judiciary to political leadership to institutions to education. It has been a thoroughly enriching conversation with you, Shobhitji. Thank you so much for sharing all of those insights with us. And thank you so much for joining us at the Festival of Bharat.
Thank you, Kamal. It was great. These are questions that don't get asked very often. They are not in the mainstream discourse, and I thank Festival of Bharat for taking up such topics and bringing them to the audience. Thanks, Kamal.
Thank you so much, Shobhitji. It has been a pleasure to host you at the Festival of Bharat, and we at the FOB wish Rashtram a lot of success and hope that you continue inspiring the young generation of Bharat and build the Bharat of that we all cherish. Thank you so much. And to our viewers, we would like to request you to please subscribe to our channel, both the Citti Media channel and the Festival of Bharat channel, because we will be posting content on both of them. And do share our videos, subscribe, and continue to support us. We will be back with another such enriching conversation. Until then, take care and namaste.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Citti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.